He's as precious as apple pie. Those were the words my mother-in-law Nancy used when she saw my newborn son. She showered him with such adoration. It was clear she truly loved him. She willingly took care of him when I was at work. But at the time, I didn't notice it. The love she lavished on my son was a bit too much. My name is Emily. I'm 28 years old and working full-time. I married my husband Liam a year ago, and soon after we started living with his parents. Before moving in, I was a little anxious, but my relationship with my mother-in-law was, I believe, reasonably good. She even helped us with household chores, since my husband and I are both busy with work. But if there was one thing that bothered me, it was the daily questions about our plans to have a child. It's been a year since you got married. Aren't you planning to have children yet? I think it's about time you started. You're not getting any younger. Don't you think you should be more mindful of that? Day in, day out, the topic of having kids would come up. Perhaps my mother-in-law meant no harm, but for me, it was becoming a source of stress. It's not like I didn't want kids. But I was also working, and we had financial considerations to think about. My mother-in-law says it's been a year, but from my perspective, we had just been married for a year. I wanted to continue working, and if we were to have children, I wanted a bit more financial security. So having kids right after getting married was not in my plans. I knew my mother-in-law was looking forward to a grandchild from the start of our marriage. But her constant demands, disregarding our situation, were becoming a problem. Feeling worn out from the constant pressure, one night after my mother-in-law went to bed, I decided to discuss it lightly with my husband. She keeps bringing up the topic of kids. What do you think? The daily remarks are putting a lot of pressure on me. I was honest with him about how stressful it was to be constantly asked about grandchildren, without any consideration of our situation.
Well, Mom was really looking forward to a grandchild, but I didn't realize she was pressing you this much. I'm sorry.
My husband seemed surprised. He hadn't thought his mother would be so persistent. He promised to talk to her about it. Then my husband made a suggestion.
Not because Mom is pushing us, but shouldn't we start thinking about having a kid? You know, I've got a promotion coming up, and it looks like my salary will increase,
Liam revealed.
So we'll have a bit more room in our budget, and I think it might be less risky to have a child while you're still young, Emily.
He wasn't forcing the issue, but he wanted to add this to the mix. He hoped I would consider it. Well, if your salary is going to increase, that might be a good idea. Okay, I'll think about it. But for now, please talk to Nancy about easing up. I requested some time to consider, and emphasized to Liam that while I was open to having a child, I needed his mom to stop pressuring us. A few days later, Liam did talk to his mom, and thankfully, her constant prodding stopped. After that, the topic of kids never came up in direct conversations, and before I knew it, I was feeling less stressed. Once things settled down, I found myself more open to the idea of having a child. Just like Liam suggested. About that baby, I think we should move forward with what we talked about. Considering our age and health, sooner might be better, I told him. So we decided to wait for his promotion to be confirmed, and then we would start trying for a baby. Half a year later, everything fell into place, and I found out I was pregnant. We were happy, but nobody was more thrilled than Nancy. She had been waiting for this moment to become a grandmother. Every day, she was restless with anticipation, always checking up on me, which was quite endearing. Although I didn't appreciate her rushing us, I knew it was because she wanted a grandchild so badly. Gradually, I found myself able to interact with her in a more relaxed manner. A few months later, The day of my delivery arrived. Despite my many fears and worries, with the support of my husband and Nancy, I successfully gave birth to a healthy baby boy. We named him Jackson. The joy I felt holding our little son was immeasurable. After the delivery, I went on parental leave and dedicated my time to taking care of our newborn. As a first-time mom, I was groping my way through child rearing, and it was a lot harder than I had anticipated. Nevertheless, the joy of having Jackson far outweighed the hardships, and I cherished every moment I spent with him. Time flew by quickly, and before I knew it, Jackson was nearly a year old, and my parental leave was about to end. I decided to return to work as planned, but then we hit a snag. We couldn't find a childcare center. I knew there was a shortage, but I didn't expect it to be this difficult. Liam and I were left scratching our heads. Eventually, I decided to extend my parental leave. During that time, Jackson kept growing, and by the time he was almost 2, I decided to return to work. We still couldn't find a childcare center, but Nancy offered to take care of Jackson. "You don't want to quit your job, do you, Emily? I'm always home anyway, so please don't hesitate to leave him with me," she said. "I'll just be bored if I'm alone." Her offer was a godsend. With our son turning 2, my husband and I had been planning to enroll him in preschool when he hit 3. There seemed to be enough openings at nearby kindergarten, and we thought we could somehow manage for another year. For the past 2 years, we'd been sharing childcare responsibilities with my mother-in-law. She was someone we felt we could trust to care for our son. Thanks to her, I was able to make a successful return to work. So I started working again. Everything was going smoothly at work, and our life was complaint-free. A year after we started this lifestyle, as our son was about to turn 3, I noticed something odd about him. He used to be thrilled when I came home, but now he seemed distant. He was always around my mother-in-law, not wanting to get close to me. I thought maybe he'd become too attached to my mother-in-law because she was looking after him. But I was also doing my best to communicate with him. I wondered what could have possibly happened. Then, something even more worrying occurred. Our son had stopped speaking almost entirely. As he grew older, he became quite the chatterbox, to the point where it was almost too much. Now, it was as if he was a completely different person, not speaking at all. Could it be because I've been working and he's feeling lonely? Or is there something wrong with him? My husband had also noticed that something was off about our son. We decided to take him to the hospital, but my mother-in-law vehemently opposed this. "A hospital? Why? Jackson is fine. He's a really good boy. I'm the one looking after him, so trust me. Don't label this child as sick." She was absolutely frantic in her opposition. This made me suspicious. A woman as overprotective as her should be rushing to the hospital if she thought something was wrong with our son. Yet she was actively opposing us taking him? I had always trusted her with our son, but this made me distrustful. My husband also felt there was something off about my mother-in-law and brought it up one night after she'd gone to bed.
Do you really think there's nothing wrong with Jackson? Mom was so adamant that he's fine.
I think we should get him checked out. I agreed with my husband. Our once talkative son had become entirely subdued. No matter how much my mother-in-law assured us he was fine, we couldn't just let it be. We decided on the spot to take him to the hospital immediately. A few days later, my husband took time off work to match my schedule, and we took our son to the hospital. My mother-in-law seemed unhappy about this until the end. "I told you he's fine. This is a wild goose chase." She was still angry as we left the house. She initially wanted to come along, but my husband told her it was best if just the two of us took him, which might have upset her. Ignoring my mother-in-law's irritation, we headed to the hospital with our son. Our son was our main concern, not my mother-in-law. Throughout our journey to the hospital, our son remained silent. My husband and I attempted to lighten the mood, to break his silence, but it was in vain. Could something be wrong with him? We exchanged worried glances. Upon arrival at the hospital, our son went through a series of tests. My husband and I stood by anxiously, awaiting the doctor's diagnosis. We were prepared to accept any result calmly, but the doctor's diagnosis was something we hadn't expected. Despite the multitude of tests, the doctor stated that there was no physical abnormality in our son. A sense of relief washed over us, but it left us puzzled. Why had our son changed so drastically? To our queries, the doctor suggested,
"It might be something psychological."
What could he mean by psychological? On our way home from the hospital, my husband and I discussed various possibilities. Still, we arrived home without any clear answers. As soon as we entered the house, my mother-in-law, as if lying in wait, asked us about the test results. When we told her that there were no physical issues, she responded with a triumphant, "See, I told you so." We deliberately kept quiet about the psychological aspect, knowing that she would likely create a fuss over it. From then on, my husband and I paid more attention to our son than ever before. I made a point of coming home from work as early as possible to spend more time with him. My husband did the same, trying to converse with our son more, even sharing a bath with him, ensuring he established solid communication. Gradually, changes started to appear in our son. He still didn't talk much, but he began to approach me with a smile, just like before. My husband and I reflected on our behavior, thinking that we might have made him feel lonely. I even started contemplating quitting my job. Then one day, after finishing work, I came home to find our son waiting to greet me. Such an occurrence had become rare, and it filled me with joy. As I patted his head and told him to wait in the living room while I changed, my mother-in-law emerged from the living room. Just as I was heading towards the bedroom to change, she stopped me, saying that she had something to discuss about our son. "Recently, Jackson has been showing a defiant attitude towards me. Did you say anything to him?" She asked calmly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, which struck a sense of fear in me. Defiant? I don't see it that way, and I haven't said anything. Upon hearing my response, my mother-in-law glared at me and began to yell. "Lately, he has been ignoring what I say. It's absurd for him to rebel against me when I'm the one taking care of him. He's being strange, rebelling against me who has been treating him so well." My mother-in-law, who had insisted that nothing was wrong with our son when we tried to take him to the hospital, she is now calling him abnormal. Her words intensified my mistrust towards her. Until now, I had left my son in her care, reassured by her apparent affection for him. But I began to question if that was a mistake. However, I saw no strange behavior from her while we were at home together. But the unsettling feeling I had about my mother-in-law just wouldn't go away. I decided to find out the truth for myself. After having a chat with her, I pulled out an old voice recorder I had used for work and secretly set it up in the living room the following morning. I didn't feel great about spying on my family, and I thought my husband might oppose if I told him about this, so I kept it a secret. Obviously, since the goal was to monitor my mother-in-law, I didn't let her in on the plan either. The next day, after I got home from work, I retrieved the recorder from the living room and played back the recording in our bedroom. What I heard was outrageous. It was my mother-in-law saying the unthinkable. My hand was shaking from shock, and I felt a surge of anger. I was mad at my mother-in-law and at myself for not noticing this before. I collected myself, then contacted my husband. I asked him to come home as soon as he could. I was thinking about leaving the house with our son. I apologized for recording without permission. I attached a message and sent him the audio file I had retrieved from the recorder. Then I quickly returned to the living room, picked up my son, and took him to the bedroom. My mother-in-law looked slightly annoyed, but she didn't say anything. As I put my son to sleep in the bedroom, I waited for my husband to come home. Watching my son's peaceful sleeping face, I heard my husband returning home. Then, I heard him yelling from the living room.
"Hey, Mom, what's the meaning of this?"
He must have rushed back home. My husband was panting. I hurried to the living room as quietly as possible so as not to wake my son.
"What do you mean? What's going on?"
There was my mother-in-law, stunned by my husband's uncharacteristic rage. I tried to calm my husband down. "Jackson is sleeping." At my words, my husband seemed to come back to his senses. He took a deep breath and motioned for my mother-in-law to sit in front of us.
Wait, what? What's happening?"
I placed the recorder in front of my clueless mother-in-law. Then I explained why my husband and I were upset. "I'm sorry, but we recorded you while you were alone with Jackson. Can you explain this to us?" I said, and played the stored audio. The numerous words that my mother-in-law had presumably spoken to my son filled the room. It was painful to hear them again. But my husband and I silently endured it and let her listen.
"When will you understand I am your mom? You should call me Mom, okay? That woman is not your mom, so don't get along with her even when she comes back. You've been clinging to that woman lately, and you've even welcomed her home yesterday, but you don't have to do that."
To my shock, my mother-in-law was demanding our son to call her Mama. Even when I, his actual mother, returned home, she insisted that he shouldn't get close to me. I was stunned into silence when I first heard about it. It also made sense why our son had been acting odd.
"That woman she's referring to is Emily, right? What on earth does she mean by teaching him Emily isn't his mother?"
My husband calmly yet angrily confronted his mother. Rehearing the recording, I realized how unsettling it was. "No, you got it all wrong. This is just a game. I'm just trying to make things fun for him." A pathetic excuse spilled from my mother-in-law's mouth. What kind of game was this supposed to be? To think she would act normal around us but fill our son's head with such nonsense behind our backs. You claimed that our son was abnormal. But isn't the abnormal one here you? All our son did was not act according to her whims, and that's why she labeled him as abnormal. There's nothing strange about a child wanting to be with his mother. But my mother-in-law couldn't stand it.
"A game, huh? Do you really think such an excuse would work? Explain yourself."
My normally mild-mannered husband, for the first time, interrogated his mother with a stern look. Caught in a bad position, my mother-in-law fell silent. No matter what we said, she kept her head down without responding. Finally, my husband, losing his patience, slammed the table and declared,
"We cannot allow someone who does such bizarre things to be near our precious son. We're leaving this house."
Upon hearing that, my mother-in-law, who had been looking down, quickly raised her head. "Huh? Leave? What do you mean? What are you saying? I absolutely hate this idea. It's going to be troublesome. I apologize. Please forgive me." She must have realized what it meant for us to leave. The previously silent mother-in-law suddenly began to apologize. If we left, not only would she lose her grandson she longed for, her life would also become difficult. We had been taking care of most of her living expenses. I felt deep contempt for her when she raised her voice the moment she realized her future living conditions were in jeopardy. Do you think a mere apology can solve this? Do you know how our 3-year-old son felt? Thinking about our son, I couldn't hold back my tears. My husband seemed to feel the same. His eyes red. He threw an even colder gaze at his mother.
We're leaving, whether you're troubled or not. As far as we're concerned, you're no longer family.
With that, he grabbed my hand and headed for our room. We began to pack, picked up our sleeping son, and left the house. The moment we left, my husband apologized to me for his mother's behavior, but I couldn't bring myself to blame her alone. We are also responsible for not noticing it earlier and leaving him with her. Hearing that, my husband murmured in agreement. But severing ties with my mother-in-law was a decision my husband and I made. It was undeniable that our current situation was having a negative impact on our son. That's why we, as parents, must improve it. As we discussed this, we hailed a cab and headed for my parents. I had contacted them before confronting my mother-in-law, so both my dad and mom warmly welcomed us. There, my husband apologized to our son about his grandmother and patiently listened to his side of the story. However, as expected, our son didn't say a word.
He might be hurt deep down. Let's give him some time until he's ready to talk.
We decided to prioritize keeping him as calm as possible for now, while also considering counseling for him.
Jackson, I'm sorry. From now on, it's just going to be the 3 of us. Mom, Dad, and you. You don't have to worry about anything anymore.
My husband gently patted our son's head as he said this. Then, in a feeble voice, our son said, "I don't like Grandma." "Jackson, can you talk?" Surprised, I raised my voice. Both my husband and I, holding back tears, waited for our son to say more. Once we told him he would no longer be living with his grandmother, he slowly began to share everything. The fear of her rage if he didn't treat her as his mother, which made him unable to say a word. Being told that I was a wicked demon and that he should stay away from me. And the confusion he felt because he loved both me and his father and didn't know what to do. In his own halting words, he spoke slowly. I deeply regretted ever trusting my mother-in-law and focusing solely on my work. My husband and I continued to apologize to our son, telling him that from now on, it would be just us 3 always together. We tried our hardest to convey to him how much both of us loved him. Since then, until we found our next home, we lived at my parents' house. Thanks to my mother-in-law's absence, our son started regaining his cheerful self, even speaking with me normally again. Every day, I am sincerely glad to see his smile back. My husband gets daily messages from his mother, begging him to come back home, but he never responds. I used a blocking feature to avoid getting any messages from her. Just the other day, my husband went alone to his parents' house to retrieve our belongings. He apparently completely ignored his mother even then. He told me she was crying loudly, like a child.
Even seeing my mother in that state, I felt no sympathy. The only family I need to protect now is Emily and Jackson. I can't tolerate anyone hurting them, even if it's their own grandparents.
That's what he said while talking about his mother. I'm deeply grateful to my husband for taking immediate action to protect our son. I truly feel that being able to live with my precious family is the greatest happiness. I do feel a little sorry for my mother-in-law, who lost that. Eventually, my husband cut off all contact with his mother, and we moved to a new home. We've arranged to hear from a relative if anything happens to his mother. According to this relative, she's completely deflated, and she seems to be getting more and more depressed every day. She doesn't seem to have much room in her life. and apparently she spends her days crying alone in her large house, without ever going out. On the other hand, we moved to a secure condominium and started our new life. I quit my job to spend more time with my son, and together with my husband, we're doing our best to take care of his mental health. Thanks to that, our son seems to be back to his energetic self. Sometimes he can be a handful, but even that I find endearing. I want to continue watching over my husband and son, to ensure that our son never has to go through anything tough again, because that is our greatest happiness.